I have the distinct honor of introducing two of the funniest, most accomplished, and incisive writers around. First off, Daniel Handler, a San Francisco native, master accordionist and general literary juggernaut. Daniel Handler has written dozens of books. I tried to count them. I tried a couple of times to count them and got lost somewhere around 30, including his most recent, We Are Pirates, the Prince Award-winning Why We Broke Up, and, of course, as Lemony Snicket, the best-selling, beloved series, A Series of Unfortunate Events. He's written screenplays, narrated audiobooks, and played the accordion in the Magnetic Fields album, 69 Love Songs. Like I said, a literary juggernaut. In conversation with Daniel Handler, we have the charming and brilliant Rabih Alameddine. Before Rabih became a writer, he had a successful career, two successful careers, I guess, as an engineer and as a painter, but I, for one, am glad that he settled on writing. He's the author of 5 books, including Kool-Aids, The Heckawati, and most recently, An Unnecessary Woman, which was a finalist for the National Book Award, the National Book Critics Circle Award, and it won a gold medal from the California Book Awards. A recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship and many others that I'm sure that I'm missing. Rabih lives in San Francisco and Beirut. So basically what I'm trying to say is you guys came to the right event. Without further ado, here are Daniel Handler and Robbie Alemadine.
Hello. He forced me to wear a hat.
Well,
And I have to say that my career as engineer would be described as many things, but successful was not one of them.
actually, let's just go to that right away, and then we'll do other things. I want to hear about your career as an engineer.
Lasted 6 months.
And you can't just say it lasted 6 months because it's not like working at Starbucks. Like you have to go and study engineering to be an engineer.
Starbucks would have been more interesting. No, I was good at math, always have been, and when I was 17, going to college, I made the mistake of having a discussion with my father, who was paying for college, and asked, he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Math." And he goes, "What, do you want to be a math teacher?" And it's like, and so he assumed that being a mechanical engineer would be better, and mechanical engineering being applied math. So I went to school, and it was okay. I did pass. My first 2 years, my GPA was 1.8. My last 2 years, it was 4.0. So I won't tell you what I did.
When we all drive across the Bay Bridge next time, we can think about it.
I won't tell you exactly what I did after sophomore year to what I stopped. But anyway, the thing that was surprising was I was really good at solving problems on paper, but I had absolutely no interest in real life problems. None. I mean, I realized I was a mechanical engineer who never really cared to figure out how a car worked or how.
That explains a lot.
And doesn't it?
And were you a fan of literature that whole time?
Yes. Actually, the fun part was here I was an engineering student, and the free electives, instead of taking guaranteed A's, I was taking Shakespeare and all kinds of weird things. Yeah. Weird though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
We got to the first lull. There'd be many of them.
No. Well, I was wondering if we wanted to talk about failure in general. Because we're both interested in it.
We could.
Yeah?
Do you want to talk about failure, or do you want to go right through the...
Well, see, we wrote down questions for each other. Okay. We wrote down questions for each other, and then our plan was to put them in a hat and draw them out one by one. And I brought this hat that I bought at a thrift store in the 90s that comes in handy surprisingly often.
And my
I
favorite
hardly
thing,
ever wear a hat, and I have this cap that says "Nasty Girl," and
and the
once
best
a year
thing
I've
is
worn
that
it.
his son looks at the cap and goes, "Why? Why are
Yeah.
you wearing that?"
My son is very embarrassed for me that I own and that I'm bringing on stage this hat. Oh well. So we have questions. We'll take them out. Maybe we'll get to failure, I'm sure.
You want to talk about failure? I don't mind.
It's hard. I believe if we are prompted by a question, it will inspire us to discuss failure. All right. So here's
So
the first
basically, each one of us put questions that we'd like to ask the other person, and we're putting them in the hat. So we have no idea what we're going to get, and we have
Yes.
no idea. We're going to both answer both the questions.
Who are your literary inspirations, and who are your non-literary inspirations, as in film, painter, piece of theater, etc.? Piece of theater sounds like an insult already.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Especially since we're in
Here's
kind of a theater.
Here's what I think about failure. See if you agree with me. I think
I love him.
of this. Of the kinds of art that you can witness that are failures, I find theater the most painful.
Ballet.
Ballet.
Ballet. Ballet, really. But then, we have to discuss whether ballet is art.
Wow.
But theater, yes, it is really, really, really painful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's some of the conventions of theater that I have a lot of trouble with. It's the offstage ticking clock or otherwise thing that they can't possibly show. When they say there's a mob just off stage, and I think I can't suspend disbelief. I think, but I know there isn't. There's not a mob.
Let me go back to forget this question for a second.
Yes.
Failure. In some ways, I prefer failures, even bad theater, to something that is competent and very well done.
Oh, definitely.
Good. See,
Yeah.
we agree. We don't have to,
I also find more inspiration in failed or at least devoutly flawed works than I do in really good ones.
Me too.
Because if I read a wonderful novel, I think, well, why am I doing that? And if I read a terrible novel, I think, oh, you know how I would fix that? And then before I know it, I've planned out a whole other novel in my head just to prove some other novel wrong.
Mm-hmm. No, actually, with me, it's a little bit, I can empathize with that. But sometimes when I read a book that I think is perfect,
name a book that you think is perfect or practically, besides all of mine.
I'll bring up Michael Cunningham simply because I like his work. But take The Hours, which I think is a brilliant book. But The Hours does not move me as much as the one beforehand, Flesh and Blood, which was a complete disastrous mess. Okay? Because The Hours was wonderful. It was compact, it set out what it wanted to do, and it did it really well. Flesh and Blood failed on many levels, but the ambition I always felt was higher. And I love grand ambitions, even failed grand ambitions. I feel an attachment to somebody who, like Icarus, who, we're going to take it up to the
So
stars.
Icarus is your literary inspiration.
Yes.
Then how could that go wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like
I've always liked the story of Icarus because I like where they say, remember, don't fly so close to the sun, as if that was what was wrong with the plan.
yeah.
Right? We're attaching fake wings with wax, but don't fly too close to the sun. How about, don't do that at all? That's a better solution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because in the book I'm working on now, I use a line that says that I was Icarus and he was the boy who couldn't spell Icarus, so of course I fell in love with him.
Oh, that's sweet. I like that. What is that you're working on now?
Oh, let's not talk about it.
Okay. I'm
Actually,
sorry I brought it up.
Yeah, no. Well, I can tell you in a week. I sent it in, so we'll see whether it's liked or not.
Oh, so are you in suspense hearing from people who read it?
I am dying right now. Yeah, every time when
Is this the first real reader of the book besides yourself?
no, I've had other readers, but she's the primary.
She's the one?
She's the one. She's the dominatrix. She's my agent. She's my best friend and agent and literary everything, you know. And
is she gentle with criticism or harsh?
she has never disliked anything that I have sent her, but this will be it.
So you are ambitious. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. My first reader is my wife, and she is not gentle, which I appreciate.
Yeah. No, I sent it to, like I have another friend who's an agent, and she goes through it. With this one, she went through it twice before I sent it to Nicole. I'm too terrified of disappointing her.
I'm not terrified of disappointing my wife because it's a certainty. There's no. Yeah, that's actually what I tell students when I teach writing sometimes. Or there's always the question of what do you do when it's not as good as you want it to be? And I think, why are you worried about that? It's definitely not going to be as good as you want it to be.
Never.
Right? That's like you jump out the window and say, what happens if I land? You don't have to worry about that at all. That's definitely going to happen. That's going to hurt. Why'd you jump out the window, you fool? Yeah. My wife says, what she says the most in terms of criticism is she will say, nobody cares, which I find it's very compelling to me, because it's true. And she's a very big reader, but she's not a writer, thank goodness. She's written some picture books, but she's not, she's never written a novel, and I kind of hope she doesn't. But because she's a reader and not a writer, she is compelled by what is compelling, but not what is kind of intellectually interesting as a writer, which I think writers, certainly myself, fall into that trap. So
I've never had that problem, never.
Well, it's lucky you. Yeah, I heard you're a great engineer. But We Are Pirates, for instance, I read all this 19th century pirate literature and was obsessed with the hallmarks and the shape of it, and so in the early drafts kept on putting those in, and my wife would say, this part isn't good, and I would say, oh, but it's kind of this, Sabatini does the same thing in one of his novels, and she says, nobody cares. And I think, oh, yes, that's true. Nobody does care. I'm throwing that out.
No, I used to say that if I've read it somewhere, it's going in the book. If I did research, it's going in the book.
I was just an hour ago. No, I was just an hour ago talking with Jim Shepard. I don't know if people were at that event, but he's a great writer, and his new book, The Book of Aaron, is about a child in the Warsaw Ghetto, and he does a tremendous amount of research. He talked about doing 6 months of research for a 3-page short story. And he says his rule is that if it's interesting, it's not going in the book, which I thought was fascinating.
That's probably a better rule.
Yeah. Do you do a lot of research?
No. I make things up.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah.
I like it that way.
Me too. And then, it's like you find out errors afterwards, but then who cares?
Yeah.
Since nobody cares anyway.
Well, I don't think I could write a genuine piece of historical fiction because I don't think I could inhabit another time. I don't think I could do the research required of inhabiting it in another time.
Yeah, no,
so I think people would just step out of their horse-drawn carriage and then say, let's use Google Maps to find out where we are, because I wouldn't.
Yeah, no, I couldn't go that far because I can't imagine not using it running water for toilet.
Yeah.
Just
That's hard.
It's not part of my reality.
Okay, your turn.
But we didn't even answer that question.
We did well enough. It's the Bay Area Book Festival. We're being graded on a curve.
Name an author who was important to you in childhood, one who was important to you in adolescence, and one who was important to you in adulthood.
I wrote that question, so
I
I already have the answer already. Edward Gorey, it is not surprising to anyone who knows me, was very important to me when I was a child. The books some Edward Gorey books were just on my parents' shelves. Even they don't know where they came from, interestingly. And they looked like picture books, but they weren't picture books. I didn't know what they were. And I read them over and over again. I found them so terrifying and so alluring. And the idea that they somehow, it was the sort of mystery where it felt like it was real. It felt like what was going on was real, and that Edward Gorey was some very mysterious figure. And he was so important to me. And when I wrote the first 2 volumes of a series of unfortunate events, I sent them to Edward Gorey with a note saying how much I admired him and how much I hoped that he wouldn't be angry that I'd stolen so much for the books. And a few weeks later, he was dead. So I like to think that I killed him.
I was going to say you have that effect on writers.
Yeah. Good to see you. Who did you like when you were a child?
Enid Blyton. Yeah, in our part of the world, we didn't get like the Hardy Boys or Judy Blume or anything. We just got Enid Blyton, and I loved them.
She's good.
She's amazing. Well, I mean, now that I look back, I wonder, but I loved them as a kid. I used to read 5 or 6 of them a day. So the famous 5, the Secret 7. I loved everybody, including the dog.
Yeah.
And there was something weird. I grew up in Kuwait, in the desert. There was something weird about, being in this really desolate place and reading about these kids having tea and the tea ritual. And it's like, it was both so exotic and lovely at the same time.
Did you see yourself in those books too?
Yeah, always. I had a vivid imagination. My imaginative life, even to this day, is more vivid than my real life. My imaginary friends are much more interesting now. But yeah, books for me have always been a way to increase the world that I live in, to make it much broader. I grew up in Kuwait. There were not that many people. It was really a desert. We were expats. I did have friends, but not that many. That world became, I started reading at an early age, and everything became, I was everything from, Batman's companion to one of the silly English boys who loved tea.
I had a very similar childhood. It was in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So but I do think, actually, that when you're a child and you're curious about the world and you're in some ways actualized, that you feel literature is one of those spaces you can go to where something's going to happen. You're waiting very excitingly for something going to happen, and literature can teach you that it is. And a lot of childhood, day by day, can teach you that it's not going to happen.
It's also, for me, it taught me that my world is not all that there is. That my world and my little world of friends, where we decided on what's good and what's bad and who's cool and who's not, was not all that there is. I was able, even at an early age, to empathize, to see a different world, to see a different set of priorities that people had. And I was able to understand that maybe, just maybe, how I looked at the world was not exactly right.
That is a glory of the beginning. It's the end of a certain kind of innocence, I think, in childhood. Yeah. And so who did you like in adolescence?
Oh, that's embarrassing. Well, let's just, yes, exactly, it's coming up.
Right.
Harold Robbins, basically.
Ooh,
that
is embarrassing.
But between the ages of 12 and 14. My mother was a reader, heavy reader. And anything I came across, I read, and I used to love, even Jacqueline Suzanne, Harold Robbins. And, I've said it once in an essay where I think his oeuvre is underrated.
I believe that.
Yeah, because the impact that it has on a 13-year-old boy is just amazing. The struggle between good on one side and evil on the other, and all these emotional currents are exactly what was happening as a boy. And then the sex, my God, the sex.
The sex was not of the sort indulged in by you. Was that?
There was no sex indulged in by me at that age. That's the whole point. Once I discovered sex, I dropped Harold Robbins.
Yeah. I'm sure he was wounded by that.
I'm sure he was. There's this story that A friend of mine told me, and it's actually true, it's called the Harold Robbins test. No matter where you go in the world, whether it's in Hong Kong or Kuwait or London, if you take a Harold Robbins book, you put it up on a table like this and you drop it, the spine will always open to a sex scene.
Does that speak to what parts people are reading or the frequency of sex in Harold Robbins books?
Does it have to be an either or?
No.
So what was yours?
Well, also sex was of interest to me as an adolescent. But I think in early adolescence, the kind of first serious author that I really took an affinity to who wasn't writing children's books was Carson McCullers. Mm-hmm. And I found the Reflections in a Golden Eye and The Ballad of the Sad Cafe and Clock Without Hands. I found those all to be so alluring and so profound. And I've gone back to them, and they're a little purple around the edges, but they're very beautiful books, and they're also full of books in which fantastical things are happening. Yeah. And I think that was important to me. But recently my mother was cleaning up the house, and she gave me this stack of books, and she said, "Oh, these are books these are your books, they're not my books." And I looked at them, and they were kind of my favorite novels from age maybe 17 to 20. And I was a very serious studier of literature even then, and so they were all kind of very highfalutin books. And I reread them all in a row, and they were all filthy. Mm-hmm. And I didn't remember them being that way, and that's not my memory of reading them, was not in a constant state of excitement. But the Mambo Kings Play Songs of Love, The Unbearable Lightness of Being, Lawrence Durrell's Alexandria Quartet, many books like that, and I remembered them as being, I remember the Mambo Kings Play Songs of Love as being this story of immigration and of music and of one moment in your life, and it is about that, but it's constant sex on the way there, and that fascinated me. It clearly fascinated me then, and then it fascinated me now to think that that's just what I believed serious literature was made of, or my favorite literature was made of.
Yeah. When I was 16, I read A House for Mr. Biswas, V.S. Naipaul, and that changed my life. I mean, once I read that, my whole view of literature changed. And that was a book that, for me, I mean, I've talked about this many times. The first time that I read a book about a third world family, if you want to call it that, that treated the protagonists as if they were, the famous five, that they were just as important as, English or French, and that changed my life just completely, and I became obsessed. Also, it's an amazing book.
It is an amazing book. Did you previously think that literature was not for you?
Yeah.
As much as you loved it?
Yeah, I mean, again, I also grew up on comics. As much as I loved it, I never understood Superman wanting, to be for justice, equality, and the American way. It's like, never got it. I never got what Captain America was about. There was always this foreign land out there. With A House for Mr. Biswas was the first time that I felt at home, because even though it was foreign, it included me. I could see myself. Now, again, I could imagine myself as Superman, and I certainly imagined myself as Robin. Who wouldn't?
Yeah.
And Wonder Woman, yes.
Do you need a moment?
No, yes. Because her fiancé, Steve Trevor, was willing to wait for her until the world was rid of evil and injustice.
That's a long time.
I know.
Yeah.
And he's willing to wait. Who wouldn't want to,
Yeah.
So, yes, it was the first time, actually. I remember it clearly. I was 16, 17, but also I was in an English public school, which is, sort of boarding school here. And to see it from that side was life-changing.
And who's a writer important to you now?
There are many. I mean, too many to name. I would say right now is Big New Herbert, the poet. He has he's probably my favorite poet. There's a dignity in it. It's both serious and mundane. It's about humanity and all its vices, and he talks about things like when the first time the Syrian war was breaking out and all the cities were under attack, I happened to be reading reports from a besieged city, and it's amazing. It is truly astounding. It's as if he was able to condense all the world's experience into 6 or 7 books of poetry.
We both read poetry a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And have you been reading that your whole life?
No, it's actually been about maybe 5 years, but I have a poetry blog now. I trained myself because I would read poetry and not I'd understand it, but it wasn't moving enough. And then I started realizing that one has to read the right poetry for you. So I started reading. Yeah. So it's been the last 5 or 6 years. No, actually a little bit more than that. Before Hakawati, so maybe 2004, 2005.
And how do you find new poets?
One poet leads to another.
Yeah.
And then talking to people. I can drop my biggest thing. I would say that it's as if I'm winning the Nobel. I had dinner with Coetzee, and I was able to talk to him because we were babbling for half an hour because we were talking about poetry and what he likes and what I like, and how dare he not like my favorite poets.
That's nice.
Yeah.
It's nice to meet a poet and to have read their work because they're so flabbergasted.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely amazing. And then that's why Coetzee couldn't stop talking to me because he goes, "You've read Tom Gunn, but I don't like him." It's like, and I looked at him and said, "Are you homophobic?" And he goes, "No, I like Robert Duncan." So yeah, it was fine.
And I read poetry most frequently when I travel. Because it's lightweight, and particularly when I travel for professional reasons, your free time is so fragmented, and if I bring a novel with me and then I'm in some green room or I'm in a Starbucks in the lobby of a hotel for 15 minutes before I have to do something, if I'm reading a novel, by the time I remember where I am, it's time to stop. And you can read a poem right before you go on Baltimore Public Radio and still have an epiphany and be in a nice space.
If there is a reason that I have an iPad, it's so that I could put all my books of poetry in it. I read them before, while waiting for my psychiatrist, which is quite often, on planes. I used to read on the bathroom, but my cat doesn't let me anymore. He jumps.
I do find that if you're reading poetry on an airplane, people leave you alone.
Yeah.
They're scared of you or something. Yeah.
So who's your adult?
Oh, well, a lot of poets for sure, but I think Haruki Murakami is probably as popular as he is, and which is wonderful. So I would love to choose someone more obscure, but I do keep coming back to him, and I've written about him twice, and I just wrote about him the second time in a review for the Times, and it was so powerful for me to really think about what it is that I like about him and to have to put it into words. But I find that the shapes of his books and of his stories and how you don't know what is going to happen next and how you really don't know what is going to happen next, even as the hallmarks of his work become familiar. And I think he's really spectacular, and there's something about I've been thinking in terms of what you've said in terms of your experience, because I was just at a conference on children's literature that was about diversity in children's literature, and one of the things it kept talking about was when books are mirrors and when there are windows, that it's so important, particularly when you're growing up, to see yourself in literature, but also to have an experience of something else, and obviously where you are in the world and who is dominant in your part of the world has a lot to do with what book is a mirror and what book is a window. But I've been thinking about books that manage to be both, because of course if you look closely you can see yourself in a window. And Haruki Murakami seems to me that way. It seems utterly familiar and utterly foreign.
Yeah, I love writers like that. And actually, if they're not, there's something wrong.
I think so too. I think all great books are strange. Mm-hmm. And I think that that experience, that prickly experience when you were reading something that you suddenly realize is amazing, is that it is strange. And that's so powerful, and I often think in America, where the obsession is what's the novel of the moment, what writer is capturing where we are now, and I always think, why do we want to know that? Why don't we want to know something that isn't happening right now, or at least happening someplace that is in some way distant from us?
Or to see what's happening in a completely different way.
Yeah.
The trouble I have with a lot of what's coming out now is that a lot of it is a lot of readers, and I'm not, no disrespect, I'm a reader.
No disrespect to anyone in the audience who can read.
Yes, you've been reading.
We like you.
Is that the expectation is that we want to see ourselves in books and to have it sort of validated, which is why there's so many memoirs of, suffering and transcending the suffering. And, we all want that. And the truth of the matter is, I actually do want to see myself in a book, but I want to see myself in a book in a really strange way. To be seen differently, to be seen uniquely, to be seen with new eyes.
Well, and that feeling when you have put a book down, and when you're still reading it, but you put a book down because you have to go do something, and you have that slight haze of, aren't I doing that, or isn't that a friend of mine? You have that feeling that the story that you're reading is somehow really immersed in your life. That's very beautiful.
Okay, next question.
Okay, it's my turn or your turn?
Mine, yours.
All right. By mine, you mean yours?
Yeah, exactly. Left, you right.
What do you read on airplanes? Well, we already said. Poetry.
Well, it depends on the flight. If I go to London, no, it's a novel. And I just take my book and I'm gone. I never watch movies on airplanes.
No?
Never.
I always do.
It's the one place where I'm not interrupted by text, by email, by phone or anything. I read.
The book often disappoints me on a long flight if I bring a long book.
Yeah.
You want to read enough of it before you get on the plane to know it's really good, but then if it's really good, you've read too much of it. Nobody suffers like I do, I guess is the point I'm trying to make.
I think that's usually my line.
Yeah. So I read a lot of poetry and then watch movies.
Next one.
I have that thing where I read somewhere that particularly for men, that heightened elevation leads to a raw emotional response, which was of a great relief to me because on airplanes I'm constantly crying at movies that then fail to move me when I see them again or something. A novel that I really loved that was out last year was Station 11, and that has a momentous thing happen about page 50 in it, and all of the reviews and the packaging of the novel describe what that is. And when I read it, I thought, it must be amazing if you don't know what it is. And my wife had not heard of this book, and so I took off the dust jacket when I gave it to her. And I loved it too, because for the first day, she said, it's pretty good, it's about this. And I thought, you don't even know what this book is about. And then I had occasion to meet the author, Emily St. John Mandel, who's charming. And I mentioned this to her, and then we both talked about another novel that came out that has a similar, very dramatic twist at about the same point, about 50 pages in, and that there's no mention of it in the novel's packaging, and the novel sank like a stone. No one, because it sounded boring. And so you can't win.
No. There's a Patrick White novel called The Twyborne Affair. I shouldn't have mentioned what it is. It's one of the most amazing novels I've ever read. And I read it not knowing anything. I mean, I've read Patrick White before, but I knew nothing about the novel. I rarely read the back matter and I was, the book is divided into 3 parts. And at the first part, at the end of it, you realize that the character is a boy and not a girl. She just dresses up as a girl, and it was mind-boggling. I had to go back, and there was never mention that she was a girl. It was just this relationship, and she was wearing she was wearing dresses and all that, and it was mind-boggling. And then book 2 was about he becomes a man. but not knowing, and then I realized that had I known the book, my first reading of that book would have been dull.
Yeah. I miss when I grew up and was first starting to read books for adults. I had a wonderful librarian at the West Portal Library in San Francisco who literally led me into the adult section when I was 11 or 12. And there were those great blank hardcover library editions that have no information on them. Do you know what I'm talking about? They might have a really ugly 70s geometric design. And I read so much literature that way. And I didn't know, and particularly when you're young, I would read it and I remember I was about 100 pages into a P.G. Wodehouse novel and I thought, this is funny on purpose. He thinks it's funny. And there was so much that I read like that. I was introduced to Agatha Christie that way. Yeah. The name Agatha Christie was familiar to me when I was maybe 13, but I didn't know what it was. And I picked up, and then there were none. And it's a, spoiler alert, it's a murder mystery and many people die. And when I was a child, that was the most exciting thing that could happen. And when you didn't know that that's going to happen in a book, and you think, oh, here they all are, they're at a dinner party in an island, like, oh my God. And then 20 pages later, oh my God, again. And it was such a thrill, and I miss that completely unknown reading experience. You can get it sometimes if you really don't know, or if sometimes I will get sent a novel to, promotionally to blurb or before it's out, and so the packaging isn't really together, and you read it and you think, wow, here I am, but you lose so much of that. Whatever context you have, you can't exist in that space for very long where you don't know anything about any literature and still be reading. But it's such a powerful experience, and I miss that a lot. Master and Margarita.
I loved that book.
I read that in high school, and a friend of mine gave it to me, and the cover was torn off. It was a remaindered paperback, so the author's name wasn't even on it. And here I am in high school again, but this is what I remembered is that it sounded dirty, The Master and Margarita. I thought, it sounds good. Right, but it's not like you think. And then 10 pages in, there's an enormous talking cat. And who knew that was going to happen? And now whenever I see there's a very popular edition of the book that has a big cat at the cover, and I think, you spoiled it already. And I didn't know the author's name was nowhere on my copy of it too, which was exciting. I thought, I've just read the world's strangest novel. I think he's Russian. That's all I know.
I reread it recently, and it blew my mind again. I love that novel. The greatest cat in literature, Behemoth.
This is the greatest cat in literature? This is exactly the sort of thing I could think about for all week instead.
Yes. Yeah. I tried coming up with another one, and I couldn't.
My favorite book in childhood, and one of my favorite books to this day, is this very strange book by Dino Buzzati called The Bear's Famous Invasion of Sicily, which I've bullied back into print because no one cared about it but me. And it has a great cat in it. It has Marmoset the cat. He's enormous, so I don't know if he counts as a cat because he's like a monster.
Well, so was Behemoth.
You haven't read that book, have you? No, that's really good. I'll give you a copy because I'm the only person who buys it. Oh, well. Your turn.
I thought I read How Do You Name You? Being a struggling unpublished writer is no fun. Describe a dark moment.
I thought you wanted to talk about failure.
Actually, it's embarrassing, or it's great to admit that I've never been a struggling unpublished writer.
There's still time.
I'm working on that, trust me. The first thing I wrote was published. And, I've always wanted to be a writer, but I never actually sat down to write. The struggle, the dark moment. Can we talk about bright moments? Because those are far and,
Sure.
I'm a depressive sort. I'm not the happiest person. I can definitely see the darkest thing in the happiest news. It's like when I won a Guggenheim, I was depressed for 2 years. Because, my whole...
When you won a Guggenheim, I was depressed for 2 years.
Yeah. When my whole writing career is based on, nobody understands me, nobody reads me, I'm going to go out and show them, and you take that away from me, and I have no idea what I'm writing for. So usually it's stuff like that. The darkest, probably bad reviews that I still read.
Why do you do that?
Because underneath the depressive, I'm also a masochist.
That's hot, but still, why do you read reviews?
I don't know. Underneath the masochist, I'm also a narcissist. I try to not to. I really try not to, but every now and then I do. You know, like I still, to this day, although it's been now 14, 15 years that I don't remember his name, thankfully. But the first review that I had in the New York Times that was deadly by somebody, they gave it to someone who was, all I remember, he was 6'6" straight, because he had an ad in a eligible bachelor thing. Even then I Googled, probably before Googled was. And he described his work as light summer reading. And he destroyed...
He described your work as
no,
his work?
Yeah, and he destroyed Kool-Aid. So the first book, he just... And I went down that rabbit hole. So yeah, those are the dark moments. Still to this day, it's like I would consider when I finish a book and I wake up and realize, oh my God, I'm still the same place I was, you know, when I finished the last book. Happy moments? I can't remember any. Being on stage with you, darling.
Oh, you're nothing but charm or something.
Sure. So what about you? You're supposed to answer that.
Oh, right, okay. Well, I lived in New York when I was trying to publish my first novel, which is really hard, because everyone there is a writer. Yeah, she wants me to finish that story. But it seemed, I was very young, but wherever I looked, I saw mediocrity celebrated, and it was really hard. I took everything personally. Everything that I thought was not an inspiring work of art that was anywhere, I took personally, because it was being stolen from me, was how I felt. That was how young I was. So I would just walk by and there would be a Kevin Costner movie poster, and I would think, oh. And that's not how I feel now.
I still feel the same way, and I'm 55.
I still feel the same way, and I'm 22.
Yeah. 23 and a half, I heard.
No, stop you. This has been a very adorable conversation, and I've had a lovely time in it. I hope other people have too, and if you haven't, oh well, and we'll see you in the lobby. Thank you.
Thank you so much.